Thanks. Sorry, we had to go for a vote. Is there concerns, say, in the line of the animal medicines in relation to the movement of animal medicines from across the border? In the line of competition, did anyone or did any of the organisations write to the Competition Authority to see about, you know, the way they're promoting it at the moment? What is your view? Ye obviously have interaction as well with the department, everyone. What's your read on it at the moment? We understood that it was progressing well up to probably a week ago, and then we understand, contrary, we had heard that there was even legal opinion there for them. We heard it was there a week, and then we heard it was there 4 or 5 weeks, even though we were told in here it was a week. We heard that basically the brakes were put on internally in the department by a few. Is that what you're reading into it? And where do you see this going? You know, we've made our views fairly clear here. Where do you see this going as farming organisations in relation to the fertiliser? Look, you have touched on the northern side of it. But in the line of the fertiliser, the other thing I'll go back to the animal medicines. A few of us today, like we'd be for basically the trained person that they'd be still able to do it, simple as that. But a few of us met a thing you can get on your phone, like VitPel, I think was the name. What was it, Jackie? You called it? An app, and I thought it was a great idea. To be quite, did any of you come across that yet? I don't know where the veterinary bodies are on it. They mightn't like it, or they might like it. I don't know. We'll hear that next week. But I think the department isn't doing a lot about it yet. Which is, you know, these are things that could help resolve issues. I'm just wondering, did you do or hear anything on that? In the line of the fertilisers, you talked about basically next year being a reference year on fertilisers. Like, is that what you're getting from the department? And like, will fertiliser be gettable next year is the first thing before we do a reference on anything. What's your views or in talking to the different bodies about that? And give me your views on the whole, like, are you for a fertiliser register or are you opposed to it? Thank you, Chair. Okay, TJ.
Chairman, thank you, Deputy. I suppose, look, as we've outlined there, the whole area of the cross-border two-phase implementation of this process undermines, as we see it, the ability of the country to proceed in an all-island approach in terms of reduction of antiparasitic usage, antibiotic usage, and indeed the whole food island concept. So I think it is going to be crucial through the combination of the Northern Ireland Protocol that we operate within the one system to ensure that we don't have a border, because let's be honest about it, there won't be a border. Deputy Carty has plenty of cousins north of Ireland, the same as every other person along the side of that border, that will have the opportunity or otherwise to be able to purchase product at a different rate. And the reality is it will totally undermine the position of the farmer within this country. So it simply cannot be allowed to proceed that we don't have uniformity across the state. The reality with the NVPS system, the National Veterinary Prescription System, is a critical piece of national legislation that we do need to implement to comply with the animal health law in Europe. And we do need that recording capacity to protect us as farmers, to highlight the fact that Ireland does actually have low antibiotic usage on our farms, and we do monitor and record our reduction in our antibiotic use going forward. And the reality is, the moment we are exposed without that, because we don't have clear trade patterns to identify the opportunities that we have to promote our country as a low-using antibiotic system. Within that system, and the weakness we have at the moment is that obviously we're now 8 weeks from its supposed relaunch, and we haven't been presented with the updated system that was shelved for 6 months to allow further implementation, further clarification of the system and allow it to work on farm. Because the key issue for us is that as a farmer, it is critical for us that the farmer has the right to take a prescription and fill it where he wishes, and to ensure that when there is multiple prescriptions, the supplier of any of those pieces of medicine can only have visibility of that prescription, not of all of his prescription, because that weakens his position in the supply chain. Because if, for the sake of argument, I want to buy my anthelmintics from my local co-op, and I want to buy, naturally I have to buy my antibiotics from my vet, but I want to get my vaccinations from another outlet. I have to be in a position where I can separate those out and trade as I normally have done, while still retaining the advantage of recording those. So this is going to be a critical piece of infrastructure for us going forward, but it has to operate in a manner which retains competition in the system and protects the right of the farmer to choose his supplier. I think the issue in terms also of that data as being highlighted is, on numerous occasions, as farmers, we are becoming very, very aware that we are the source of very valuable data, because in essence, our food is essentially feeding many parts of the world. So the control and management of that respects the right and production of the farmer is crucial to ensure we can control that going into the future. In terms, Deputy, and this is again in terms of the situation we find ourselves in, is the vacuum in terms of the legal opinion that you indicated may or not be there. We are again running to a cliff edge where, to be fair to the suppliers in the market, other than the vets at this stage, are running into a situation, when do they stock or do they not stock? And this is completely unfair for those businesses to be operating in those circumstances. And we fully support that that's the situation that the specific, specially trained qualified person, as has been indicated by the HIPRA report, requires a multifaceted approach and multi-supplier level to deal with the issue going forward. Fertiliser issue there, Max, you have 1 or 2 issues you want to raise there on Deputy's questions. Thank you, Deputy Fitzmaurice. Yeah, well, it hasn't been explicitly stated by the department. It is in the draft bill. It does clearly say, to inform policy and achieve a reduction in organic fertiliser. So there would have to be concerns over there about how much the reduction would be, and obviously with the database, it does create a valuable well of information in respect of that. Yeah, in respect of fertiliser availability, obviously it will be challenged, but it likely will be available. And I suppose that the slight decline in gas prices this week across Europe is probably gives a little bit more hope in regards to European manufacturing of fertiliser, which has been heavily hit in recent weeks. So that's it. That's from me.
Mr. McConnell.
I suppose just you spoke about Deputy Fitzmaurice about the legal opinion and that, and look, the timing of your I suppose information or ripple effect information would be pretty similar to our own. Obviously, the cross border is an issue. If you turn right going out the gate and you arrive into the freedom to trade, and if you turn left going out the gate, you arrive into a lot of complex issues. So that would have to be addressed. If you look to the past, brucellosis was a hugely challenging issue in this country, and it really took an all-island approach. And it's probably fair to say, from a BVD eradication perspective, it will be something similar. We do need, and TJ alluded to it there, our product is sold around the globe in significant portions, and we do need to be in a position to be able to stand over what we have, what we do. I suppose you mentioned there the trained persons, and in response to Deputy or Senator Daly's question, I said it's absolutely imperative that the trained responsible operators in veterinary practitioners are in a position to dispense drugs, because you hit the busy time of the year and there's a cesarean and a herd test on and there's 2 vets out on call. it may not do, and it may not be feasible for the farmer to come back in 4 or 5 hours. So that's absolutely imperative as we move forward. You touched on the fertiliser and its availability. Sources indicate to us that it will be available up to and including the spreading of first round of silage. Industry sources indicate with a bit of confidence in that regard. We saw, I suppose, in 2022, panic set in and inflation, and we saw where the profits went. A threefold increase along the supply chain, which was hugely frustrating given the farmers were paying at an all-time high, and that's the last thing we want as we head into 2023. You mentioned, or you asked the question about 2023 as a reference year. The indications that I have been involved in the Dairy Vision Group 2030, and indeed the Beef and Lamb Group, is that all the talk is about the usage in 2018 as a national level, and I would say that there won't be I would suspect that there won't be a reference for an individual year for individuals, but it will be linked to land, available area of land and stock and density as we move forward. And I would have a fear that yet again we'll see an imposition on farmers of the requirement for a fertiliser plan, which will, cost significant sums of money for farmers, irrespective of their scale. So I just issue that word of caution to you, Deputy Fitzmaurice, to be vigilant for. But don't see 2023 as the reference year, 2018 as an overall usage, and it'll depend on terms and conditions after that of one's farming intensity and level.
And I think, Deputy Fitzmaurice, you asked the question, do we want a fertiliser register? I think we had discussions with you there a number of weeks ago in relation to the new nitrous action programme and the nitrous derogation. And the reality is, as farmers, there's legal limits on the amount of nitrogen we can use in our farms. A fertiliser register is just another piece of red tape and bureaucracy on top of farmers, to be quite honest with you. It's another hurdle I'm going to have to jump as a farmer, and I think it's a huge concern for farmers from the point of view of penalties, sanctions, etc. And I think it's another headache. And from our perspective, we have legal requirements. The vast majority of farmers are meeting those legal requirements, and but unfortunately, the EU Commission and the Department have said that it is a necessary requirement. It's a bit like the nature restoration law. It's another issue, and it's another cost and headache on farmers.
John.
And thanks, Deputy, for the questions. I suppose a lot of them have been covered, and I won't reiterate some of the points that have been made, but just in terms of the cross-border issue, it is a huge issue in regard to both of them in terms of the operating of the market on both sides of the border to undermine the trade and the system of trade that operates on the island. And it will be a significant issue, not just only for farmers and those operating within the border counties, but for a wider implication of the cost of and the trade within the island. And I suppose it's mentioned within the bill, and it's mentioned that we have it that fertiliser is recorded on the point of dispatch, but there's nothing to say in terms of measuring that in terms of when it comes across the border into a farmer's yard. So in terms of enforcement, it does beg the wider issue that a farmer may be using the market tools at his disposal, his or her disposal, to get the product at the cheapest price possible. And you get to the point of inspection at halfway through the year, or spot inspection later on in the year, and because they have accessed the market on a cross-border basis, there is no registration for some of the fertiliser that the farmer has used. And where does that leave the farmer in the context of meeting the requirements of the inspection and also the enforcement? And with the stricter rules under the nitrates derogation, that also begs the question as to whether or not those farmers who may be involved would essentially lose their derogation given the strictness of it. In relation to the medicines, I suppose we have similar opinion and information to yourself in relation to the legal opinion that the department have got. We're unsure obviously what's contained within that, but we do recognise that the brakes have definitely been put on the development implication and the procedure that was highlighted to us earlier in the summer as to the steps that was going to be conducted before the 1st of January. And you're at a stage now where a database must be established that's capable of registering this information, but similarly suppliers within the market, as has been highlighted, must have product on the shelf for farmers as well. and we are aware of the app that you've spoken about as well in terms of its development. We are aware of similar apps that are evolved and have been implemented in other markets across the EU and have worked effectively, but understand that there is a role for the department here in terms of certification and validation of any such and every form of an app that would be used in such regard of prescriptions or so forth. So we're unsure as to the time frame of when something like that may become effective or deliver for farmers, but would welcome any opportunity for that to be developed if it makes the burden of the administrative burden on farmers any easier. In terms of the availability of fertiliser for next year, we've heard similar to what Pat has said in relation to availability. We would raise significant concerns over the availability of P and K fertiliser. That the breakdown of that in terms of the fertiliser makeup could have implications on farm as well, that farmers who are operating within derogation but also outside of derogation, given that some straits may not be available, and obviously if you're using more compound fertilisers, you're going to get to your ceilings an awful lot quicker than if you're using straight fertilisers, and that must be taken within consideration of the derogation as well. And I think that the final point that we'd make in relation to the encompassing all of the progression that we should be trying to make in terms of antimicrobials and resistance and so forth will be the capability of our analysis to keep up with the demand that farmers may have for identification of whether that be in antimicrobials or in terms of any disease risk that might come on farm, that we will need significant lab analysis to identify the issues. And we've seen, frankly, a lack of investment and an attitude from a Department of Agriculture point of view to significantly under-resource that sector in terms of forage and lab analysis. And we've been looking for assessments and increased funding for forage and lab analysis for farmers to drive the demand now for 6 or 7 years without any increased support from the Department of Agriculture, which will be required if farmers are required to test for burdens of worm burdens or egg burdens for parasites or for anthelmics. So investment is going to be needed to support the rollout of any such measures as well.
Mr. Fowle. That'll come on itself, Mr. Fowle.
Thank you, Chairman. Deputy Fitzmaurice, I just want to follow on there on the fertiliser. We started it and go back to availability, but that is, at the minute we're hearing that it will be available, and there is stocks there due to underselling there this year with the way the pricing was. And maybe it's affordability we should be looking at in a lot of cases for some farmers, and especially in the beef and the suckler end of it. And I think this is a big issue. It already has showed reduction in the last year, what has been spread, and recording it is a necessary exercise as far as we are concerned. Is reducing bureaucracy and paperwork we need to be doing instead of creating it. And as far as the medicines and that, we have no more information, as all other speakers said, in relation to what you know yourselves, which is very disappointing. We should have been meeting on a more regular basis, but we weren't given the opportunity and updated on these issues. So I think they just presume they're going to come up with a decision and say, well, this is it, and expect us to roll around. And that is not going to happen, and that hasn't happened, and that is ICSA stand. And all farmers stand on that we stand firm on that belief. I think, to be honest with you, we have to look at it in another way. If the right decisions was made some years ago, if derogation had to be applied for, we wouldn't be in this position. And that is the problem, because with us and the Northern Ireland, which is only across the road from it, they have derogation, they can trade, they can work away. There's failure on the partner's behalf here, but didn't go for that derogation and put it in, and we've seen it with the harvest in the bogs. Now, at the end of the day, there's nobody taking responsibility for that. There's nobody else being saying when they're penalised on that grounds, but it's coming back to penalise us as farmers. So, to me, I think that's where we need to look at that one. We want the department to come forward. It's down to a couple or a small number. It has to be at this stage, just holding it back. They can't hold everyone for ransom. we have been fair at all times and cooperated through all discussions and meetings to bring it forward. And like our own industry has to be looked after, but we always have to look after the suppliers of our product, because they are part of it and our availability, as I said earlier on. So that'll be, you want to follow on with that?